Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for gathering together in sacred fellowship, where we can not only immerse ourselves in this wonderful and rich text that is written before us, but also immerse ourselves in the text of one another's lives and the life that we create together through the beautiful weaving of this web of friendship and fellowship. We are in Parshat Terumah, which begins in the book of Exodus, chapter 25, with verse 1. We'll read through our English translation of our portion. I'll share with you a little bit of focus study, and then we will have our joint and collective conversation. This evening, I'd like to dedicate this study to an individual. This week, the entire city of Portland is blanketed in both loss and celebration. This week, a former mayor of Portland, Bud Clark, died at the age of 90. And he was an extraordinary man and an extraordinary mayor. Bud was a Marine. He was a small businessman who ran perhaps what could be considered one of the most successful taverns in the United States. He achieved the extraordinary renown of selling more beer per square foot in his tavern than any other tavern in the United States. And one of his main suppliers to his tavern, the Goose Hollow Tavern, was Budweiser. And as important as Budweiser was to his business, he stopped doing business with Budweiser when Budweiser opposed the bottle bill in California decades ago. He would leave the premises of his tavern around noontime, and the rest of the people that worked there had no idea where he went every noon. And it turns out that what he was doing was he would leave work and he would go deliver Meals on Wheels, and never told anyone about it for years. At some point, he decided to run for mayor, as he put it, not because he wanted the job, but because he thought the job needed to be done. And he thought that the person who was serving as mayor at the time was really not in tune with the feelings, the culture, and the attitude of the people of Portland. And so he decided to run, and everyone thought it was really a joke. They were really, probably the only person who didn't think it was a joke at first was himself. And he was a rather eccentric person. And his campaign slogan was, "Bud is serious." And indeed, he won a remarkable election during the primary here in 1984, much to the surprise of virtually everyone. And while he was mayor, he accomplished great things, and he remained at the same time his humble, authentic self. He would be known, he could be known as someone who would be driving to a meeting and it'd be pouring rain, and he would notice that the streets were flooded from the rain. And a friend of mine was in the car with him, and Bud stopped the car, got out of his car, opened the trunk of his car, pulled out an old golf club, and then started unclogging the water drains at the curbs of the streets. And then he got back in his car, soaking wet, and went forward to the meeting to conduct his meeting. And the very next day, perhaps he would do something quite as grand and as extraordinary as launch a campaign to build a convention center for the whole state of Oregon here in Portland. So he was also someone who understood the need to have a police department that was in tune with and aligned with the standards and the values of the people, rather than imposing law and order on the people, and set about a rather extended campaign to change the policing culture here in Portland. So he was really someone who didn't just know policy, he knew, it seems, virtually every person who lived in Portland. He would go around with a camera wherever he went, whether it was to a meeting or to a policy session. He would take out his camera and just start taking pictures of everyone who was there, because they were the ones who were important, much more so than he himself was. So he was an extraordinary person, and all the memories and stories and news coverage that has been unleashed these past few days has really provided all of us here in Portland with a kind of a civic stimulation of a citizen activism that Bud stood for, which unleashes personal creativity, a sense of neighborliness, and a rather sense of practical solutions to civic problems that defy political labels. So we're all kind of reliving that at a time when we really do need to be reviving ourselves civically. And it reminds us that when we put people first rather than ourselves first, the impossible can really be done. So I want to just share with you the motto that is written on the walls of Bud's tavern, the Goose Hollow Tavern, that he wrote to give you a sense of this man. So he wrote, dedicated to quality draft, fine food, pleasant music, and stimulating company. We're also dedicated to extremes of opinion, hoping that a livable marriage will result. If physical violence is your nature, either develop your verbal abilities or leave.
Did you work with him, Rabbi?
Yes, I served on his staff for 4 years.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Richard, if you'd like to comment.
Yes, just one thing. You mentioned about his feelings about the police and the memoir of him and in the tavern. But I live in Multnomah Village, and in Multnomah Village, there is a very famous cafe called Fat City. And there's a plaque on the wall next to the second booth down on the left-hand side when you walk in. And it's a newspaper clipping of the time Bud Clark sat in a booth with some of his counsel and the police chief.
Oh, he went on silent.
Oh,
His opinion, and Bud said,
Richard, we lost you, Rico, just for a little minute. Start over again about in the booth.
in the booth, at the side of the booth, there's a plaque or a framed newspaper article with a picture of Bud Clark and what happened on a day when he was there with part of his counsel and the police chief. And there was a disagreement between he and the police chief about how to run things. And the police chief went back at him about, this is my business, this is what we're doing. And Bud said, you're fired. And so he had, the conviction and the ability to do this in public. And also there's a famous picture of him, perhaps you've seen it, from behind. He's got a trench coat open and he's facing a statue of a nude woman. And the caption is, expose yourself to art. So we do miss him.
That photograph that was turned into a poster, which,
Yes.
A copy of which now sits in the Louvre in Paris, France, was a fundraiser for syphilis education to provide people with the knowledge that they can be treated for this disease and how to avoid it. And I remember one day, Anna and I were in Jerusalem. We wandered into a poster shop, and there was the poster. And I said to the man running the store, I worked for him. And the owner of the store said, incroyable, it's amazing that you're here. So he was had a tremendous impact, and it's an approach to civic life that I think we do well to revive among us and within us as well. So I'd like to dedicate this bit of Torah study to former Mayor, City of Portland, J.E. Bud Clark. Thank you all very much. And with that, let's turn to our Torah portion, which is beautifully named Terumah, which can be translated as gifts. And we're going to explore what the nature of these gifts are, what they are designed to induce into the world and perhaps into ourselves as well. Let me share with you some of the opening verses, and then we'll have an opportunity for everyone to take turns. And we say our blessing. Thank you. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot divrei Torah. Thank you, God, for this opportunity to immerse ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah. God spoke to Moses, saying, "Tell the Israelite people to bring me gifts. You shall accept for me from every person whose heart so moves them. And these are the gifts that you shall accept from them: gold, silver, and copper, blue, purple, and crimson yarns, fine linen, goat's hair, tan ram skins, dolphin skins, and acacia wood, oil for lighting, spices for the anointing oil, and for the aromatic incense, lapis lazuli and other stones for setting for the ephod and for the breastpiece. And let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them, exactly as I show you, the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of all its furnishings, so shall you make it." Jim and Peggy, would you like to read a little bit, beginning at verse 10?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. They shall make an ark of acacia wood, 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, and 1.5 cubits high. Overlay it with pure gold, overlay it inside and out, and make upon it a gold molding round about. Cast 4 gold rings for it to be attached to its 4 feet, 2 rings on one of its side walls and 2 on the other. Make poles of acacia wood and overlay them with gold. Then insert the poles into the rings on the side walls of the ark for carrying the ark. The poles shall remain in the rings of the ark. They shall not be removed from it. And deposit in the ark the tablets of the pact which I will give you.
You shall make a cover of pure gold, 2.5 cubits long and 1.5 cubits wide. Make 2 cherubim of gold, make them of hammered work at the 2 ends of the cover. Make 1 cherub at one end and the other cherub at the other end. Of one piece with the cover shall you make the cherubim at its 2 ends. The cherubim shall have their wings spread out above, shielding the cover with their wings. They shall confront each other, the faces of the cherubim being turned toward the cover. Place the cover on top of the ark after depositing inside the ark the pact that I will give you. There I will meet with you, and I will impart to you from above the cover, from between the 2 cherubim that are on the top of the ark of the pact, all that I will command you concerning the Israelite people.
Thank you both so much. Let me invite Mark Thompson. Would you like to read beginning at verse 23?
Thank you, Rabbi. You shall make a table of acacia wood, 2 cubits long, 1 cubit wide, and 1.5 cubits high. Overlay it with pure gold and make a gold molding around it. Make a rim of a hand's breadth around it and make a gold molding for its rim round about. Make 4 gold rings for it and attach the rings to the 4 corners at its 4 legs. The rings shall be next to the rim as holders for poles to carry the table. Make the poles of acacia wood and overlay them with gold. By these the table shall be carried. Make its bowls, ladles, jars, and jugs with which to offer libations. Make them of pure gold, and on the table you shall set the bread of display to be before me always.
Thank you so much. And Paul, would you like to read starting at verse 31?
Thank you, Rabbi. You shall make a menorah of pure gold hammered out. Shall the menorah be made? Its base, its shaft, its cups, its knobs, and its blossoms shall be hammered from it. 6 branches shall emerge from its sides, 3 branches of the menorah from its one side, and 3 branches of the menorah from its second side. 3 cups engraved like almonds on the one branch, a knob and a flower, and 3 cups engraved like almonds on the next branch, a knob and a flower. So for the 6 branches that emerge from the menorah. And on the menorah shall be 4 cups engraved like almonds, its knobs and its flowers. A knob shall be under 2 of the branches from it, a knob under 2 of the branches from it, and a knob under 2 of the branches from it, for the 6 branches emerging from the menorah. The knobs and branches shall be of it, all of it a single hammered piece of pure gold. You shall make its lamps 7. He shall kindle its lamp so to give light toward its face. Its tongues and its spoons shall be of pure gold. Of a talent of pure gold shall we make it with all these vessels. See and make according to their form that you are shown on the mountain.
Thank you so much. Richard, would you like to read starting at the first verse of chapter 26?
Yes, Rabbi, thank you. As for the tabernacle, make it of 10 strips of cloth. Make these of fine twisted linen, of blue, purple, and crimson yarns, with the design of cherubim worked into them. The length of each cloth shall be 28 cubits, and the width of each cloth shall be 4 cubits. All the cloths to have the same measurements. 5 of the cloths shall be joined to one another, and the other 5 cloths shall be joined to one another. Make loops of the blue wool on the edge of the outermost cloth of the one set, and do likewise on the edge of the outermost cloth of the other side. Make the 50 loops of the one cloth and 50 loops on the edge of the end of the cloth of the other set, the loops to be opposite one another, and make 50 gold clasps, and couple the cloths to one another with the clasp, so that the tabernacle becomes one whole.
Thank you, Richard. And June, would you like to read a little bit beginning at verse 7?
Thank you, Rabbi. And thou shalt make curtains of goat's hair for a tent over the tabernacle. 11 curtains shalt thou make them. The length of each curtain shall be 30 cubits, and the breadth of each curtain 4 cubits. The 11 curtains shall have one measure. And thou shalt couple 5 curtains by themselves, and 6 curtains by themselves, and shall double over the 6th curtain in the forefront of the tent. And thou shalt make 50 loops on the edge of the one curtain that is outmost in the first set, and 50 loops upon the edge of the curtain which is outmost in the second set. And thou shalt make 50 clasps of brass, and put the clasp into the loops, and couple the tent together that it may be one. And as for the overhanging part that remaineth of the curtains of the tent, the half curtain that remaineth over shall hang over the back of the tabernacle. And the cubit on the one side and the cubit on the other side of that which remaineth over in the length of the curtains of the tent shall hang over the sides of the tabernacle, on this side and on that side, to cover it. And thou shalt make a covering for the tent of ram skins dyed red, and a covering of seal skins above.
Thank you so much, June. Justin, would you like to read a little bit beginning at verse 15?
Thank you, Rabbi. You shall make the planks for the Mishkan of acacia wood upright. 10 cubits shall be the length of each plank, and 1.5 cubits shall be the width of each plank. Each plank shall have 2 square pegs, rung-like, one even with the other. So you shall make all the planks of the Mishkan. You shall make the planks for the Mishkan, 20 planks for the southern side. You shall make 40 silver sockets under the 20 planks, 2 sockets under one plank for its 2 square pegs. And for the second side of the Mishkan, on the northern side, 20 planks. And there are 40 silver sockets, 2 sockets under one plank and 2 sockets under one plank. And for the western end of the Mishkan, you shall make 6 planks, and you shall make 2 planks at the corners of the Mishkan at the end. And they shall be matched evenly from below, and together they shall match at the top, be put into one ring. So shall it be for both of them. There shall be for the 2 corners. There shall be 8 planks, and their silver sockets, 16 sockets, 2 sockets under one plank and 2 sockets under one plank. And you shall make bars of acacia wood, 5 for the planks on one side of the Mishkan, and 5 bars for the planks on the second side of the Mishkan, and 5 bars for the planks on the rear side of the Mishkan on the westward end. And the middle bar in the midst of the planks shall extend and penetrate from one end to the other end. And you shall overlay the planks with gold. Their rings you shall make of gold as holders for the bars. You shall overlay the bars with gold. You shall erect the Mishkan according to its proper manner, as you will have been shown on the mountain.
Thank you, Justin. David, would you like to read beginning at verse 31?
You shall make a curtain of blue, purple, and crimson yarn, and fine twisted linen. It shall have a design of cherubim worked into it. Hang it upon the 4 posts of acacia wood overlaid with gold, and having hooks of gold set in 4 sockets of silver. Hang the curtain under the clasps, and carry the ark of the pact there behind the curtain, so that the curtain shall serve you as a partition between the holy and the holy of holies. Place the cover upon the ark of the pact in the holy of holies. Place the table outside the curtain and the lampstand by the south wall of the tabernacle opposite the table, which is to be placed by the north wall. You shall make a screen for the entrance of the tent of blue, purple, and crimson yarns, and fine twisted linen done in embroidery. Make 5 posts of acacia wood for the screen, and overlay them with gold, their hooks being of gold, and cast for them 5 sockets of copper.
Thank you. David and Susan, would you like to read beginning at the start of chapter 27?
Yes, thank you. And you shall make the altar of acacia wood, 5 cubits in length and 5 cubits in width. The altar shall be square, and 3 cubits its height. And you shall make its horns on its 4 corners. In the same piece its horns shall be, and you shall overlay it with bronze. And you shall make its pails for its ashes, and its shovels, and its basins, and its flesh hooks, and its fire pans. All its vessels you shall make of bronze. And you shall make for it a meshwork grating of bronze. And you shall make on the mesh 4 bronze rings at its 4 corners. And you shall set it beneath the ledge of the altar from below, and the mesh shall come halfway up the altar.
And you shall make poles for the altar, poles of acacia wood, and plate them with bronze. And its poles shall be brought through rings, so the pole shall be on the altar's 2 sides when carrying it. You shall make it hollow of boards, as it was shown to you on the mountain. You shall do it so. And you shall make the Tabernacles Courtyard for the south side. To the south, hangings for the courtyard of woven linen, one side having 100 in cubits, and its columns 20, and their bases 20 of bronze, and the columns hooks, and the rods of silver. And so for the north side, in length, hangings of 100 long, and its columns 20, and their bases 20 of bronze, and the columns hooks, and their bands of silver. And the courtyard's width for the west side, hangings of 50 cubits, their columns 10, and their bases 10.
Thank you
And
so
the
much.
Go ahead.
Let me invite Catherine, if you'd like to read beginning at verse 13. Thank you
Thank
both, David and
you,
Susan.
Rabbi. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
For the width of the enclosure on the front or east side, 50 cubits, 15 cubits of hangings on the one plank with the 3 posts and their 3 sockets, 15 cubits of hangings on the other flank with their 3 posts and their 3 sockets. And for the gate of the enclosure, a screen of 20 cubits of blue, purple, and crimson yarns, and fine twisted linen done in embroidery with their 4 posts and their 4 sockets. All posts around the enclosure shall be banded with silver, and their hooks shall be of silver. Their sockets shall be of copper. The length of the enclosure shall be 100 cubits, and the width 50 throughout, and the height 5 cubits, with hangings of fine twisted linen. The sockets shall be of copper. All the utensils of the tabernacle for all its service, as well as all its pegs, and all the pegs of the court shall be of copper.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you, everyone. That's our entire Torah portion for the week. If you have a copy of the study sheet, I invite you to take it out now. I'll go through a little bit of focus study, and then we'll have an opportunity for our collective and collaborative conversation. I've entitled this week's study session, The Artist at Work. And our point of entry into this week's Torah portion is an assemblage created by the artist El Adnatsui. El Adnatsui is an artist who was born in Ghana in about 1944, and currently he works and lives primarily in Nigeria. And what El Adnatsui does is in his work is he takes everyday discarded materials such as bottle caps, mechanical parts, aluminum, copper wire, and then he assembles them into striking visual pieces. And his works really reflect his interest in the reuse and the transformation and the connecting, the reuse and transformation of everyday materials, and connecting also his works with traditions of his native continent of Africa. And he does all these pieces with a sense of seeking to transcend at the same time the limitations of place. The piece that we have here, Between Heaven and Earth, is made up of those pieces. I invite you to, at some point, go on your computer and expand the image, and you can see the different materials, the bottle caps, the wires, and the pieces of aluminum that have all been woven together in this assemblage. It's a rather large piece. It's about 7 feet high and about 10 feet wide. And one of the conceptual underpinnings of his work is that his pieces take on different forms each time they're installed, thereby challenging the view of sculpture as something that's rigid and insistent. We're going to see, this beautiful piece, which is just luminescent, having been made of pieces of material that were just discarded and set aside for some kind of recycling, or perhaps just on a garbage heap. We're going to see how this piece of work takes us into a deeper understanding of this week's Torah portion, Terumah. Number 1 on the study sheet, what I've laid out here is a rather fascinating bit of mathematics, if you will. The entire story of creation really takes up 1 chapter in Torah, and then the moment at Mount Sinai takes up 3 chapters. The story of the Exodus consists of 11 chapters. The construction of the Mishkan takes up 13 chapters. We're going to explore what is this. There's some kind of, I want to suggest, evolution here that's going on between the first story, that of creation, and then ending up with the construction of Mishkan, and how with each evolution in this grand story, they takes up more and more chapters, and we're going to see what might that mean. And I guess I want to tell you a little bit more about that up front. The story of creation, of course, is God acting God alone and bringing about everything into existence. The story of Mount Sinai, of course, is God then revealing God's self to everyone. The story of the Exodus is a little bit more, one might say, of a collaborative effort. Moses and Aaron are participating in this. All the Israelites are participating in this. So while God has a hand in all of it, God is not acting alone, if you will. Here, with the construction of the Mishkan, this is a project, a piece of work that's going to be constructed and built entirely by the Israelites. So with creation, we begin with a creative work that's done entirely by God. We move through these different iterations where God has kind of less and less of a role until we get to the construction of the Mishkan, where the project is in the hands entirely of the Israelite people. I want to suggest this. What we're seeing in terms of an evolution, if you will, is that of the master artist who's raising up apprentices to become masters themselves. And the construction of the Mishkan is the first piece of work that these apprentices are now doing, having been taught and raised and mentored, and now they are embarked upon their own great work of art. We're going to explore a little bit about what exactly is that work of art that these now once apprentices and now master artists themselves are engaged in. So for that, if you look at number 2, this is a verse from our Torah portion. Let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them, exactly as I show you, the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of all its vessels, so shall you make it. Our first commentator is our medieval commentator, Rashi, and he has this remark into the verses that we just read. He writes, it means let them make me a house of holiness. And what Rashi is picking up on is that it says, let them make me a sanctuary. And the word in Hebrew for sanctuary is mikdash. And so Rashi is picking up on the notion that the name of this construction project is called the mikdash. And the word mikdash is based upon the Hebrew root kuf dalet shin, which as a noun means holiness. So Rashi is indicating, what's really being constructed here is a house of holiness. Now the word that is based upon kuf dalet shin, which in its noun form is holiness, the first time we see that word or that root in Torah is in the story of creation, and it first appears not as a noun, but as a verb. And it is something that God does. God, if you will, kadoshes, God sanctifies. And so what Rashi, in a sense, is doing is reminding us that is tying this scene back to the story of creation, that there is some act of creation that is reminiscent of God's act of creation back in the very first chapter of Genesis, Bereshit. So the project that the Israelites are engaged in is meant to be reminiscent of or reflective of God's act of creation in the beginning of Genesis. Our next commentator is a bit of commentary on Rashi himself, and they say, so that I may dwell in their midst, betocham, which is from our Torah portion. And what this bit of commentary is doing is The purpose of the dwelling, if you will, is to induce dwelling, but it's not dwelling in the physical structure. It's a dwelling within the people, within them. Number 3 is a bit of Hasidic commentary that is in response to a very basic question that we human beings ask of themselves. Why am I here? Why are we here? And the answer that Hasidic tradition gives is, we're here to make a home for God in the material world. Well, what exactly does that mean? Does that mean that we're to design something that is going to bring this independent external being into the material world? So now we're going to read a bit of commentary by Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson. To make our world a home for God, we must recast the very foundations of its identity from a self-oriented entity into something that exists for a purpose that is greater than itself. The first step involves priming the material resource as a vessel for godliness. Making ourselves vessels for godliness is a greater feat than actually bringing godliness into our lives. So here, Rabbi Schneerson is picking up on another word that appears in the verse that we quoted in number 2. And he's picking up on the word that gets translated, excuse me, as vessels, the word kli, which on its surface meaning means utensil or vessel. And in early rabbinic literature, it's understood that that word kli, utensil, vessel, referred just to the articles that we've read about so far. The tongs, the fire pan, the parochet, and so forth, all those articles that were to be constructed that were to be part of the function and design of the Mishkan. Later in Jewish history, the meaning for that word of vessel, of clay, becomes also attached to other aspects that get used in Jewish worship, such as the Chumash, prayer books, and so forth. And then later in Jewish history, excuse me, around 1911, I believe it's a rabbi from the Netherlands, begins to apply this term of clay, kodesh, of holy vessels, to also apply to human beings that are charged with the upkeep of the Torah mantles. And then it's not until the 1960s that this word clay, vessels, becomes used in a way that it's more widely used today. It in terms of applying to human beings who are engaged in the study and teaching of Torah, that those who spread the wisdom of Torah themselves can be defined as clay kodesh, holy vessels. And this was used first, we believe, by Rabbi Menashe Klein, who was a survivor of the Holocaust. He was spent sometime after the war in a detention facility, a displaced persons facility in France, until he came to the United States and became leader of an ultra Orthodox Haredi community in Brooklyn. So Rabbi Schneerson, in a sense, is using the phrase which gained greater popularity in mid-20th century as applying to we can be vessels. And what Rabbi Schneerson is saying is we have to reorient, restructure our internal selves away from pure ego identity into a vessel that's now serving something far more than our individual selves, but is serving something that is transcendent and eternal and sublime. So if you turn over the study sheet, what we've been talking about, particularly within this Hasidic understanding, is the spiritual dimension of this project called the Mishkan, which is not just to build a physical structure, which is what the text seems to be describing, but it is describing really an internal rebuilding of one's spiritual life. And so here in number 5, we're going to see how this spiritual dimension also has an ethical dimension to it. And this is from Rabbi Daniel Hartman, who's from Jerusalem. And this is from an article he wrote in the Los Angeles Jewish Journal in 2013. The defining feature of a Jewish public space is that it must be a safe one. Safe not merely from harm, safe not merely from a Hobbesian definition of the state of nature as being a state of war of all against all, but safe in the sense that individuals who enter it know that their well-being is a concern of all who share in that space. A space is a safe one when all who inhabit it are fellow keepers. A space wherein the individuals recognize their responsibility to override their personal interests and not merely refrain from harming others, but actually care for and respond to their needs. If you'd like to conclude by having everyone turn back and look at the piece by Natsui, what the art piece is showing us is our capacity to refine and repurpose our everyday materials, not just the physical materials that you might find lying on the street, but the everyday characteristics and traits that we carry within us. And that when we refine and repurpose them for something beyond our own self-need, we can achieve something sublime. And at the same time, we can connect with a tradition, even as that tradition evolves and transforms as we use it. And with that, I'd love to hear your thoughts and reflections. And Mark Thompson, please go ahead and unmute and share with us.
Thank you, Rabbi. I was reading item number 2 in your worksheet, and the word is mikdash. And it made me think of a song that I learned when I was in Israel that Naomi Shemer sang. It's a song of my father, and it talks about rebuilding the mikdash. So if you don't mind, I'd like to offer this as my contribution tonight.
Lovely.
Thank you. Im bachar chatzav ta'even lehakim binyan chadash. Bachar chatzav ta'even lehakim binyan chadash. Lo lashiv achi chatzavta levinyan chadash. Ki min ha'avanim ha'ilu yibane ha'mikdash. Yibane, 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 Hamikdash. Yibane, 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 Hamikdash. It means, if on the hills you've planted a cedar in place of the thorns, it was not in vain, O my brother, for from these cedars the Temple Mount will be rebuilt. The temple will be rebuilt.
Beautiful, Mark. And tell us what inspired you to share that with us. What did it mean to you?
Well, first of all, anytime I hear a song from Naomi Shemer, who was very, very popular in Israel during the 60s, I'm returned to a time when I lived in Israel, and it was a very special time, and I learned all kinds of Israeli music. And, you know, she titled this Father's Song. So it has, you know, a special meaning to those of us who miss our fathers. And then you have the Mikdash, you have the sanctuary that is supposed to be a dwelling place for us. And this is a different kind of sanctuary. It's one that comes much later, but I thought it might fit.
It does. And your singing is not only a blessing for us, it's an honor to your father, Tommy Thompson, as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And David Phillips, go ahead and unmute and share.
I just have a question, which is clay kadosh. Clay's, we're translating it as vessels in the study sheet pretty much. Is it also the word clay that's used in Kabbalah when it talks about the vessels?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So when you think about a vessel, then either in the text that we read, it's referring to really utensils,
Right.
right?
Implements.
To think of it as the vessel is that becomes then a receptacle. And so this notion, then the image becomes one of, if you will, an urn perhaps, that is now having poured into it this water and carrying forth that water. So that is the image really in which you have it within Kabbalah, which is that we are the recipients of these emanations that are constantly flowing into us as vessels. Okay, so thank you very much.
Well, and one of those vessels it was called the sea, or the Great Sea, and of course, Mayim is a word that resonates with me because it's, for me, really indefinite.
Well, and as Anna
Multifaceted.
just said, and you are a waterman.
That's right. I'm a water engineer. That's right.
That's right.
I make water do what it's supposed to.
That's right. You help,
Never does.
help maintain the flow of water.
But I didn't say engineer, I said man, because he has that power inside himself.
So you in more ways than one, just like there's multiple dimensions to what's being described here, both the physical object of the Mikdash and the spiritual and ethical dimensions to it. That's what you do. You are not only a guarantor of the courses, the physical courses of water, but in your personal and communal life, you keep those things flowing as well on a spiritual and ethical level. So thank you, David. Okay. Let me invite Catherine. I see you've got your hand up. Go ahead and unmute and share with us.
Okay. I was thinking about what you said about the artwork. Being an artwork that actually changes its shape each time it's moved. And I have this feeling the Mishkan is sort of like that it's really a work in progress. And that, you know, it's not being done expeditiously as though you would practically build something and then it stands there and it's built. It's a work in progress. It takes so many chapters to be created. So I don't know about that.
Catherine, it's absolutely beautiful what you just said. It's a thought that crossed my mind as well. And it is kind of what I was referring to when I was identifying the artist as saying that when he installs this piece, it shifts a little bit. It's never exactly the same from place to place. And so it's defying our sense that something that has a form to it and something that, like a sculpture, has to be rigid and insistent. And that is indeed the way tradition comes to understand this movable structure called the Mishkan, which has indeed evolved over time. Anna, did you like to share something?
In the same way that, well, like you said earlier, the first creation gets just a chapter, and then we have 13 chapters for the Mishkan. God does it in one, you know, and it takes us 13 to even get the directions to do it. But if, as was just shared, that it is a movable thing that gets taken apart and put together, recreated each time, and if it is a reflection, the 13 chapters of the first chapter, then that puts us in a really special and personal relationship with God, who is renewing creation every day, who is changing and reformulating, you know, himself or God's self into our lives. That God is part of that present. You know, I'm becoming that I am becoming, right?
Perfect. I mean, and this is the way the Hasidic tradition also understands this phrase, so shall you make it, meaning that we have to remake constantly in a way that's responsive to our circumstances, to our searchings. We need to remake this structure we call the Mishkan in a way that's meaningful, suitable, and felicitous for us, not trying to replicate what was done thousands of years ago. Robert, go ahead and share with us.
Thank you. I have a question, a comment. Based on everything you've said about this art piece, if I could name it, I would name it Throw Me Not Away. Because what you've described is what this has elements that are not valued. There are people who are not valued, but in reality have luminosity. It's a word you use. They have reflection, they have goodness. And society tends often to throw people like that away without ever seeing the beauty in them. And then the other thing that you mentioned was to look up close, and that's what we have to do with people, to see the goodness, to look beyond the veneer, to get to the heart where people really live. And then you mentioned that the form moves, and don't we move? If we have a bit of anger from joy, wow, do we move, right? Now, here's my question, though. Reading tonight from the Exodus, that was complex. What skills did they have? Was this complex thinking at that time? Was that within their skill set, or did they have to really stretch to understand that? I mean, it's not easy reading.
Right. Well, here's the way it's presented within the tradition, which is basically, you Israelites, you know how to be builders. You did that in Egypt, but you were building for a despot. You were building for a culture of death and oppression. Now you have the opportunity to build for life and for celebration. And so, yes, those skill sets, if you will, in a very practical sense, are transferred, but now they're being used for this purpose of being attuned with the source of all life, rather than being attuned to a culture of death and oppression.
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay. And thank you, Robert. And June, go ahead and unmute.
Thank you, Rabbi. It's interesting that you said that this is changing and moving with each look and the creation, and yet it's very specific in what we read on how to make it, how long it should be, how many pieces it should be, what kinds of materials should be used, what color the material should be. How did they remember all of this? Was it all written down that they would know exactly, or was it just to give them an impression and then they use their own inspiration? I find it, that it's very specific. And yet we talk about, change, and every time they put it up, it's in a different place. And yet I find a dichotomy there between the exactness and the change. Okay. I want to explain that.
Thank you. I have some thoughts about that. I see that David raised his hand. David Phillips, would you like to say something about that?
Well, I've said this in prior years. I spent a couple of decades writing instructions for people to build things, and then another decade reviewing what other people wrote to tell instructions for people to build things. And from the perspective of a guy who reviews other people's specification, and of course the review hat or glasses say, how can this be misunderstood? Is there internal conflict? Are there vague things in here can be understood more than one way? And from that perspective, if this had been brought to my desk, my response would be, it's not nearly long enough.
So I'm going to respond to both what you just said and what June just said. If you remember in our text, God says, you shall build it just as you saw on the mountaintop. So what the Midrash says, well, what does that mean? What did you see on the mountaintop? Was it a charrette? I mean, did they have some kind of model that Moses saw and he came down? And the Midrash says what God displayed in terms of the instructions and directions and specifications for what's to be built were different colors of fire. Red fire and blue fire and green fire. And then from that, this is what they built. They have so the sense there is what God has provided us is, if you will, is a sense of the spark of holy imagination. And then we concretize that in some kind of way.
That's a nice way to put it.
But what we always, when we look at the concrete that we've constructed, the actual material that we've constructed, what we should be seeing is the divine inspiration, the fiery imagination. That's what we should see. Okay, so thank you.
There was a drash I read last year about Tibetan Buddhist monks creating mandalas with colored sand on a sand floor. I think it was in Long Beach. And what she said, what blew her away is as they were constructing it, they were making an even more complicated construction in their minds of a heavenly palace that was in fact an icon or representation or a visualization of the universe.
Beautiful. So by necessity, we need to live in a concrete material world. But when we look at the concrete material world, we should be drawn to the fiery, transcendent, and immaterial imagination that exists. Let me call on Richard, and then I'll get back to Susan. Richard?
Yeah, what impressed me is that all this gift giving, that the people give a lot of stuff there, oil, silver, copper, so forth. And God gives us the idea, the form, and this is a two-way street. And that the doing of it in the same way, if we behave with respect to all the rules and laws, it shapes the inner person to be a vehicle, to be a vessel, to bring out the realization of the divine in the material world. And it's this two-way I-thou relationship we have with our maker. And that's what this represents. We give gifts, he gives gifts, we get it together, and with him in mind and in heart and in soul, we build this beautiful thing.
Thank you, Richard. Beautiful.
And it's still going on.
Still going on. Thank
And
you.
this is our generation doing its little bit to add some cloth and some stuff, and we're all vessels.
Beautiful. Thank you. And Susan?
And so with all of these gifts that he had a spring, he teaches us to build holy community.
Yeah. So Bill, and that is what it means to be a great artist. That's what great art is really designed to do, right? It is to break through what seems to be only material, only rigid, only static, and to see something transcendent. And ultimately that transcendent is what flows through all of us and brings us all together. So with that, I want to, let me ask Paul. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, each week I tune in because I'm living in a kind of a material world, and this transcendental ideas, it really attracts me. But on the other hand, I also pay attention to the words. And in Terumah, let's see, creation, you got all these different numbers. But if I counted the number of words, the number of times they use the word gold and silver in that same chapter, you wonder, sometimes, in the painting that you have, we talked about, just the opposite, bottle caps and all the other stuff, and that's consistent with the world that I'm listening to each week. But the idea that you know what, we're going to have, when somebody looks at that Mishkan, do they see all that stuff, or do they see the gold and the silver?
So color, we in this day and age, we take color for granted. We encounter color, all the time. We wear color. We walk through color. Right? But if you'll notice in Torah, color is rarely mentioned. And there are two most prominent places where color becomes significant and is so beautifully described. One is what we just read, the design of the Mishkan. The other has to do with the design of the garments that the priests will wear. And it's designed that way for us to see something extraordinary and to have us be aware that these moments of focus at the Mishkan and during these moments of service to God through the priests in the Torah, that's where color appears. And it's designed to kind of startle us, I think, and also to have us focus on something that transcends this moment. And the notion about sometimes, we can be rather hard on ourselves. And if we see a bad quality in ourselves, we want to just get rid of it. We want to quash it. We want to bury it. We want to toss it aside. And I think the message of this Torah portion is rather than get rid of it, refine it. That there are these aspects of ourselves which could take us back into Egypt, back into despair, back into enslavement, back into confinement, back into hopelessness. But if we have the capacity to see that if we can refine these and use these urges and feelings and traits and characteristics for a holy purpose, we can achieve wonders and beauty. And I think that's the intent of our artists' work here. And I think it's the intent of the art project that is not just the Mishkan, but the whole Torah, if you will, is an art project designed to teach us how to be great artists, to make our lives ennobled and holy and connected to all other life. And with that, I'm so glad to be connected to all of you. I look forward to our study once again next week. God bless you all and be well. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.